Veteran and his dog save a wheelchair bride, only to learn. She's the angel who'll change everything. The storm came down the Sawtooth Range like a living thing, swallowing the pines, the road, and every sound that usually reminded Elias Hart he wasn't completely alone. By late afternoon, the sky was a sheet of white static. Snow hammered the roof of his truck, shaking loose memories he'd buried too deep to name. Rocco sat in the passenger seat, rigid, ears forward. The German shepherd's breath fogged the window in short, sharp bursts. He smelled something before Elias saw it. The beam of the headlights cut through the storm and hit twisted metal. A black SUV lay on its side in the ditch, half buried under fresh drifts. Steam curled from under the hood. The windshield was shattered inward, as if the world had punched straight through it. Rocco let out a low growl. Not fear, warning. Elias braked, boots sinking into snow the moment he stepped out. The wind slapped at his face. He pulled his coat tighter and motioned to the dog. Stay close. Rocco moved like a shadow beside him. The first thing Elias noticed was a smear of red across the passenger door. The second was a glint of white fabric inside. He yanked the door with both hands. It took effort. Metal groaned. Then he froze. A woman sat strapped in the seat, a wedding dress torn and tangled around her legs. And under her, locked in place, was a wheelchair frame. Her skin was pale blue from the cold. Her lips barely moved when she breathed. Rocco stepped forward, sniffing the air. His tail was stiff, body tense, head darting toward the tree line behind them. Elias felt the warning rise through the dog's stance before he heard anything. Something had been here. Something still was. He unclipped the woman's belt. She fell into his arms, weight lighter than it should have been. Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment he saw nothing but fear in them. Fear of him, of the storm, of something else he couldn't name. What happened? He asked. She tried to speak. Only one word made it out. Don't go back. Elias looked toward the road. Tire tracks. Deep ones. But not from her SUV. A larger vehicle had stopped here, then turned around. Rocco barked once, sharp, directed at the trees. Elias didn't need more confirmation. He lifted the woman carefully and started toward his truck. What's your name? He asked. Her voice cracked. Lydia. Lydia Moore. Lightning pulsed behind the clouds, silent but blinding. A rumble followed, long and low. Elias steadied her in the seat, checked her pulse. Faint, but there. Then he saw it. On the wheel well beside her, smeared into the grime, was a handprint. A man's hand. Too large to be hers. Fresh. The snow hadn't covered it yet. Rocco saw it the same second he did. The dog's hackles rose, a rumble in his chest deep enough to vibrate through the truck door. This wasn't an accident. Elias slammed the door shut and rounded to the driver's side. He climbed in. He couldn't stop the memory that cut across his mind like a blade. His wife's body under twisted metal, the same storm, the same cold, the same helplessness. Not again. Not this time. Rocco jumped in beside Lydia and positioned himself between her and the window, watching the tree line like a soldier guarding a perimeter. The truck fishtailed as Elias punched the gas. The road climbed toward his cabin, the world dissolving into white as the storm thickened. Lydia stirred. Her hand gripped his sleeve. He's coming. Elias glanced at her. Who? Her heartbeat jumped under her ribs. Her eyes widened with something closer to terror than pain. My husband. The words struck harder than the wind. But before Elias could ask anything more, Rocco barked again, this time explosive, frantic. In the rearview mirror, through the veil of snow, a pair of headlights flared to life on the road behind them. Too close, too deliberate. Elias tightened his grip on the wheel. Hold on. The storm swallowed the road ahead, the truck roaring into the white void. Rocco braced for impact, and Lydia trembling between breaths. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. It had just begun. The cabin sat at the edge of the ridge, half hidden under the storm's heavy breath. Elias carried Lydia through the doorway, her dress trailing across the floorboards like a ghost of a ceremony that never happened. She kept her head low the entire time, eyes fixed on her hands as if afraid that meeting his gaze would break something fragile inside her. Rocco entered last. Snow clung to his fur, melting into dark streaks. The moment the door shut behind them, he circled Lydia once, slow and deliberate, tail stiff, ears high. Elias had seen that look on the dog only a handful of times. Not distrust, not aggression, something sharper, instinct in its pure form. Guarding, but not from her. For her. Elias set Lydia gently on the couch, then tossed a blanket over her shoulders. She didn't lift her eyes. Not once. "You warm enough?" he asked. She nodded, barely. The silence stretched. Snow battered the windows in angry sheets. The storm had teeth now, the kind that cut through pine and bone with equal ease. Elias stoked the fire, watching her from the corner of his eye. Rocco sat between them, perfectly still. Not at Elias's side like usual, but in the middle, blocking the woman from the door as if expecting someone to burst through it. "Tell me what happened," Elias said. Lydia swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened on the blanket. "I was at my wedding," she whispered, "and I was left behind. Left behind." The words were hollow, like she had practiced them but didn't believe them herself. Rocco's ears twitched. His eyes locked onto her, studying every quiver of her voice. "Who leaves a bride in a wheelchair on her wedding day?" Elias asked. She flinched but didn't answer. He watched her another moment, piecing the details in his mind. The shattered SUV, the second set of tire tracks, the handprint pressed into the metal, the way she told him not to go back, and those headlights chasing them through the storm. None of it fit a simple story of abandonment. He tried again. "Lydia, someone was following us. Who was it?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. That was enough. Elias had interrogated men in burned-out villages who hid their truth behind steel eyes. Lydia wasn't one of them. She wasn't lying to him. She was lying to herself. Rocco stood suddenly. The dog walked to Lydia, lowered his head, then pressed his shoulder against her knee. She inhaled sharply, as if no one had touched her with gentleness in years. "He won't hurt you," Elias said quietly. "He knows things I don't." Lydia blinked at Rocco, tears swelling but refusing to fall. He felt her fear before she admitted it. A crack of thunder rolled over the cabin. The walls shuddered. Rocco turned to the door and growled, deep and low. Elias moved to the window. Beyond the porch, snow twisted in violent spirals. The woods were buried in darkness. But somewhere within that black, something moved. Not wind, not branches, something with weight. He stepped back. Rocco was already at attention, body rigid, throat rumbling. "Talk to me," Elias said without turning. "Why would anyone chase you?" Lydia's breath hitched. Her hands trembled, gripping the blanket hard enough for the threads to strain. "I told you, I was left," she said, but her voice shook and broke on the last word. Rocco barked once, sharp, cutting through the lie like a blade. "Stop," Elias said softly. "He's not reacting to the storm, he's reacting to the truth." She closed her eyes. For a second, Elias thought she'd shut down completely. Then her shoulders sagged, defeated. "My wedding was not what it looked like." Rocco settled beside her again, nudging her hand with his nose. She let it rest there, barely touching. Elias waited. He didn't push. The fire cracked, snow hissed against the windows, and the storm raged outside like the world was trying to drown her silence. Finally, she whispered, "I was supposed to sign something today. Papers. My family estate. My guardian wanted control. When I refused, everything changed. Guardian. Not husband, not fiancé. Guardian." Rocco's head jerked up. Elias felt the pieces shifting. You weren't left behind. Someone tried to make sure you didn't make it out. Her breath stuttered. She still didn't meet his eyes. "I didn't know they would take the wheelchair. Make it look real. Make it look real." Elias stared at her. The wedding dress. The chair. The crash. Lydia Moore hadn't been sitting in a wheelchair by fate. Someone had put her there. Before he could say anything, Rocco snapped his head towards the door again. This time, his teeth bared. The growl was different, deeper, a warning sharpened by certainty. Elias crossed the cabin and peered through the window. The snow was thick, but through the haze he saw a faint shadow moving between the trees. Then it was gone. He stepped back, pulse tightening. "No one abandons a bride in a wheelchair," he said. "Not unless they want the world to believe she's helpless." Lydia shook her head. Her voice was barely audible. "Please don't make me go back there." Rocco left her side and stood next to Elias, shoulder to shoulder with his handler, ready. Elias didn't need more answers. The dog had given him one already. Whoever was out there wasn't finished. Whoever put her in that chair was still hunting. And the storm outside was the only thing keeping them apart. For now. Night settled over the Sawtooth Range with a kind of heavy silence that felt chosen, not accidental. Elias lit the lantern on the kitchen counter, trying to warm the cabin faster than the storm cooled it. Lydia sat wrapped in the blanket he'd given her, hands tucked in, shoulders trembling in short, uneven breaths. Rocco paced the room once, then twice. He kept glancing at the door, nose twitching every few seconds, picking up scents the storm hadn't erased. Elias brought Lydia a cup of hot tea. When she reached for it, something slipped from the folds of her dress and fluttered to the ground. A folded piece of paper. Elias bent to pick it up. He expected torn vows, emergency contacts, maybe a marriage license, but the first thing he saw was a law firm's header. Inheritance transfer agreement. He stared at it. The page was signed by Lydia Moore, not in flowing cursive, in a shaky, pressed-down signature, as if she had been forced to write quickly. "This isn't a wedding document," he said. Lydia froze, her breath hitching. "I didn't mean for that to fall." He looked up at her. "It didn't fall. You dropped it because you're scared." Her eyes darted away, but the truth was already out. Before either of them could say another word, Rocco moved to the door with purpose, claws clicking against the wood. His entire body sharpened, muscles locking into alertness. He growled, low and steady. Elias knew that sound too well. It was the sound Rocco made in Afghanistan when something buried under rubble was wired to kill. "Stay here," Elias said. He grabbed his coat, slipped outside, and followed Rocco into the storm. The trees groaned under the weight of the snow. Wind hissed through branches like a warning in an old language. Rocco led him deeper toward the ridge, stopping beside the damaged SUV they'd left half-buried earlier. He sniffed the metal, then let out a short bark. Not fear. Confirmation. Elias knelt beside the crumpled bumper. Rocco pushed his snout under the frame, dug at the snow, and pulled free a strip of residue clinging to the underside. Elias held it close to the lantern. A familiar scent hit him like a flashback. Explosives, not fresh, but real. The dog had found the trace of a detonator compound he'd smelled on old battlefield vehicles. This wasn't a simple crash. Someone had planned to disable Lydia or destroy the SUV entirely. Rocco nudged the bumper again, then lifted his nose toward the tree line. A sound whispered through the dark. No footsteps, no voice. Just a shifting in the snow, too soft to place, too heavy to be an animal. Elias stiffened. Someone had been here. He scanned the trees, but the storm wrapped everything in a white blur. Only Rocco could feel the presence clearly, and the dog wasn't moving. He stood guard at the edge of the forest, tail stiff, staring into the dark as if daring whatever lurked there to show itself. Elias backed away, trusting Rocco's instincts more than his own senses. Inside the cabin, Lydia sat with her back to the fire, knees pulled to her chest. She didn't look up when he returned. "Please," she whispered, "don't take me back to the city. Not tonight. Not ever." Elias hung his coat and walked toward her. The lantern threw trembling shadows across her face. "You need to tell me the truth," he said. She shook her head. "He'll find me. He always finds me." "Who?" "Your guardian." Her silence was louder than any confession. Rocco walked toward her and sat down, his head lowered so he could press his muzzle gently against her leg. Lydia flinched at first, then let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. "He's trying to take everything," she said. "The money, the estate, the trust my mother left me. And if I don't sign those papers, he needs everyone to believe I'm incapable or gone." Elias set the folded agreement on the table. "This paper is worth a lot more than money if it proves intent." "No." She grabbed his wrist. "You don't understand. He doesn't need the paper anymore. He needs me gone so no one questions anything." Her eyes lifted to meet Elias's for the first time since he'd found her. They were green, sharp with fear, but also something else. Resolve. Outside, a sudden crack sounded from the tree line. Not thunder, not falling snow. A footstep on a frozen branch. Rocco reacted instantly, leaping to the window, chest vibrating with a growl that rose from deep inside him. The hair on his back stood straight, a warning carved into the night. Elias moved beside him, but saw nothing. Only the storm twisting between the pines. Lydia shivered violently. "He's here." Elias kept his eyes on the darkness beyond the glass. "Not tonight. The storm's too strong. No one could cross that ridge in weather like this." Her voice broke. "You don't know him." Rocco barked once. The sound echoed like a shot. Elias stepped back from the window. He didn't say it out loud, but the truth hit him hard. The storm wasn't protecting them anymore. It was hiding something. The storm thinned by morning, leaving behind a white silence that felt staged, as if the world were waiting for Elias to move. The mountains were still buried in fog, but visibility returned enough to make out the trail where they'd come from. Elias strapped on his boots, grabbed his rifle, and whistled softly for Rocco. The dog came immediately, posture sharp, eyes locked on the tree line. Lydia slept on, the couch, exhaustion finally winning over fear. Elias wrote a quick note on the table in case she woke before he returned. He stepped outside with Rocco at his heel. The cold slapped him awake, clearing every thought but the mission in front of him. They followed the same path the truck had taken the previous night. The snow revealed everything and hid everything at once, but Rocco was born for this. His nose swept the ground, picking up scents buried beneath ice. He moved fast, weaving in tight arcs until he found something. He stopped at the edge of a small clearing. Elias knelt. A shell casing lay half buried in the snow. Recent, too clean to be from hunters, and too close to the road to be random. Rocco lifted his head toward the ridge above them. Elias scanned the slope, eyes narrowing. There were footprints trailing away from the casing, spaced too far apart for someone walking casually. Someone had been running. He followed them with Rocco leading, each step pushing a deeper ache through his legs. The trail climbed the ridge, winding through thick pines until they broke into a narrow pass. The wind was louder here, howling between the rocks like something trapped. Rocco stopped again, this time beside a crushed object half hidden under snow. A camera. The lens was shattered, the casing dented as if smashed repeatedly against stone. Elias picked it up. He couldn't turn it on, but one thing was clear. Someone had been recording. Someone didn't want the footage to exist. Rocco's ears shot forward. Elias looked up. The ridge curved into a sharp drop. Snow had been disturbed along the edge, forming a wide, curved bite out of the hill. Long streaks of dirt and black ice cut through the white, pointing down the cliff like a finger accusing the earth below. Rocco approached the edge and stood still, nose pressed toward the drop. Elias felt the truth hit him like he'd been shoved off that cliff himself. Lydia's SUV hadn't swerved. It hadn't lost traction. It hadn't been caught in the storm. It had been pushed, hard enough to leave a signature. He crouched, brushing the snow away until the ground revealed thick grooves where tires had locked up against something much heavier. The memory hit him without warning. Sand. A burning horizon. The staccato of gunfire. A convoy ambushed from both sides, his unit trapped in a narrow pass with no cover. The explosion that flipped their vehicle. The weight of the desert pushing down on him while his brothers screamed for help. And the worst part, knowing someone had planned it. Rocco whined softly, nudging his shoulder as if grounding him in the present. Elias exhaled, forcing the ghosts back into the sand where they belonged. Not now, not here. He wasn't losing another person because he froze in the shadow of a memory. He pushed himself up. "Good boy," he murmured. Rocco's tail brushed his leg, but his eyes never left the drop. Elias scanned the ridge again. There. A second set of tracks. Deeper, wider, following a different angle towards the cliff. The tracks of a truck or a heavy off-road vehicle. It had backed up to the ridge, shoved Lydia's car, then sped away. If Rocco hadn't smelled the explosive residue last night, Elias might have believed the lie. The staged wheelchair, the fake wedding, the crash meant to look like tragedy instead of murder. Something cold crept through his spine that had nothing to do with the wind. Someone had wanted Lydia gone. Permanently. Rocco barked once, breaking the silence. It wasn't fear, it was a call to attention. Elias followed his gaze across the ridge. Halfway down the slope, lodged between two boulders, lay a torn scrap of black fabric. He slid carefully toward it, grabbed the piece, and recognized the texture instantly. Tactical glove material, industrial grade, the kind professionals used. Rocco growled again, deeper, pointing his nose downhill. Elias followed the direction. At the bottom of the slope, half buried in snow, were two deep indentations. Kneeling prints. Someone had crouched there, watching the crash, watching the cliff, watching the road he and Lydia had taken. Elias clenched his jaw. Someone had been close enough to finish the job. He felt Rocco press against his leg, steady and certain. The dog wasn't just tracking. He was bracing Elias as the truth tightened around them. This wasn't a runaway bride. This wasn't a family dispute. This was a hunt. And Lydia wasn't the only target anymore. Rocco suddenly tensed, muscles locking. He stared into the trees behind them, a low rumble working its way up his throat. Elias gripped his rifle. A single branch snapped somewhere in the darkness. He spun toward the sound, rifle raised, Rocco lunging forward with bared teeth. But the forest settled again, too quickly, too perfectly. Whoever had been there knew how to move, how to hide, how to vanish. Elias swallowed hard. Rocco kept growling. The ghosts of Afghanistan clawed at the edges of his mind, but he forced them back. He wasn't losing control. Not again. Not this time. Rocco turned, tugging gently on Elias's coat, pulling him toward home. Not retreat. Warning. Whoever was watching them wasn't leaving. They were circling, waiting for night. By late afternoon, the storm eased into a pale, eerie calm. Meltwater dripped from the pines in slow, rhythmic taps, each one breaking the silence like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. Elias moved through the woods with Rocco at his side, heading towards the ravine where Lydia's SUV had landed the night before. Snowmelt carved narrow channels across the slope, revealing the wreckage bit by bit. Rocco reached the crushed vehicle first. He sniffed aggressively around the passenger side, pawing at the floor beneath the torn seat. Something glinted under the melting ice. Elias crouched, brushing away the slush. A small black phone lay wedged under the seat rail, cold and half-frozen. Lydia's voice echoed in his head. "He'll find me. He always finds me." He pocketed the phone and scanned the ridge again. No movement, no shadow, but the earlier footprints still burned in his mind. Back at the cabin, Lydia sat near the fire, holding her knees close to her chest. Her wedding dress was draped over a chair, the wheelchair folded and leaning against the wall like a bad memory trying to hold its place. She looked up when Elias entered, and the fear on her face deepened when she saw the phone in his hand. He held it out without a word. Lydia stared at it as if it were a weapon pointed at her. "Where did you find that?" "Under the seat. Buried. Someone tried to hide it, or you tried to protect it." Her jaw tightened. Her eyes glistened, reflecting the firelight. Elias powered the device on. The screen flickered, cracked but functional. A single video file sat on the home screen. Untitled. Time-stamped from the morning of her wedding. He looked at her once more, offering her a chance to tell him the truth before the screen did. Lydia dropped her gaze. She gave no explanation. Rocco sat beside her, pressing his head lightly against her arm, sensing the tremor running through her body. Elias tapped the video. The footage opened on a lavish parlor. Lydia sat in her wheelchair, wearing the same dress she had on now, except pristine. Beside her stood a tall man in a charcoal suit. Graham Whitford. Confident. Charming in the way a politician knew how to be charming. Except his smile held a coldness that curdled the air. "Lydia," he said in the video, "either you sign the transfer or you know what happens next." Lydia on the screen shook her head. She was trembling, but defiant. "My mother didn't intend for you to have control. She wanted the trust protected." Graham's jaw twitched. His voice dropped. "Your mother left me in charge because she knew you couldn't run your own affairs. The wheelchair proves that." Lydia whispered something the audio barely caught. "I can walk." Graham leaned down, his face inches from hers. "Not today. Not at this ceremony. You'll play your part. You'll stay in that chair. You'll sign what I tell you. And if you don't, everyone will believe you had an accident on the way to the altar." The video shook violently, as if someone grabbed the recording device. A woman's voice whispered off camera. "He's coming. Hide this. Now." The footage cut abruptly. Elias set the phone on the table, the sound of it clacking louder than it should have. He didn't speak. Not yet. He didn't trust himself to. Lydia wiped her cheeks, breath trembling. "I tried to run. I wanted to tell the truth before the ceremony. I wanted out. But he followed me. He always follows me. So I pretended the chair was real. If he thought I was helpless, he wouldn't fear me leaving." Elias leaned forward. "But you did leave." She nodded. "I had a driver help me escape. Graham found us before we reached the highway. He forced the car off the road. I crawled into the woods, found the SUV on the service path, and stole it. I thought if I made it into the storm, he would back off. But he didn't." Her voice broke. "He chased me. He rammed the SUV. He pushed me toward the cliff. I used the wheelchair to make him think I wouldn't try to run anymore. But when the car started sliding, I couldn't get out in time." Rocco nudged her hand gently, licking the back of her wrist. Lydia let out a small, shattered sound, somewhere between a sob and relief. Elias watched her, feeling something shift inside him. She wasn't lying. She wasn't manipulating. She was drowning in a truth heavier than the storm outside. "There's one more thing," she said softly. "I didn't pretend to be helpless just to escape him. I pretended because the world listens more to a woman who can't fight back. But I'm done pretending." She slowly placed her hands on the armrests of the couch and pushed herself to her feet. She wobbled from exhaustion, but she stood. Rocco stepped back, eyes wide for a moment, then moved to her side, tail low but wagging very slightly. Approving. Accepting. Elias wasn't shocked. He had suspected as much. But seeing her stand after everything she'd confessed added weight to her story. He looked at the phone again. Graham Whitford wasn't guessing where she was. He knew. Rocco suddenly snapped his head toward the window, body tightening, tail stiff. A guttural growl rolled from deep in his chest. Elias moved beside him, scanning the tree line. The fog had thickened again. The kind that swallowed a man whole. Lydia whispered behind him. "You see something?" Elias didn't answer. His breath fogged the glass. The woods were too still, too quiet, the kind of quiet that followed a predator's arrival. Rocco barked once, sharp, directive, a warning carved into the cold. The truth wasn't just close now, it had arrived at their doorstep. The storm rolled back in with a vengeance, turning the Sawtooth foothills into a shapeless white void. Wind hammered Elias's cabin, rattling the shutters and burying the porch in fresh drifts. Inside, the fire snapped and hissed, but the heat could not cut the tension. Rocco refused to sit. His body was rigid, ears pricked, nose pointed toward the door like a compass needle locked on danger. Elias checked the bolt-action rifle, then quietly set it aside. His instincts screamed that firearms would escalate things too fast. He needed control. He needed clarity. He needed to keep Lydia alive. Snow crunched outside. Not the soft settling of powder, but deliberate weight. Boots, 3 sets. Lydia stiffened. Rocco growled deep in his chest, a primal warning that vibrated through the floorboards. "They found me," she whispered. Elias didn't answer. He was already moving, checking the windows, watching the shifting shadows between the trees. The cabin lamps flickered as the storm snarled through the valley. Then the shadows separated from the pines. Graham Whitford stepped into view. First, his dark coat, flapping in the blizzard like a torn flag. 2 men followed behind him, bulky silhouettes with broad shoulders and purposeful strides. Graham cupped his hands around his mouth. "Elias, let's make this easy. Send her out." Elias opened the door just enough to be heard over the roar of the wind. "She's not going anywhere with you." Graham smiled through the snow, a thin, icy crescent. "That's not your decision." One of the men reached for something under his coat. In that single moment, Rocco exploded through the half-open door, a grey streak of muscle and instinct. Elias barely managed to yank the door wider before the shepherd barreled down the porch steps. Rocco hit the first attacker low and fast, knocking him into a snowbank. The man screamed as Rocco clamped down on his forearm, dragging him further into the drift. Blood splattered across the fresh snow. The second guard tried to grab the dog from behind, but Rocco twisted, jaws snapping, forcing the man to stumble backward. The shepherd's deep, furious bark split through the storm like thunder. Elias bolted onto the porch. Graham charged him. They collided hard. Elias drove his shoulder into Graham's chest, sending both men into the snow. Graham swung wildly, fueled by panic and pride. Elias blocked 2 strikes, but the third clipped his jaw, sending a burst of stars across his vision. Graham reached for a knife strapped to his boot. Inside the cabin, Lydia watched, breathless, trembling. The old wheelchair sat abandoned in the corner. For years, she had pretended it confined her. Tonight, she refused to let it. She pushed up from the couch and stood. Her legs wobbled, weak from fear and cold, but they held. Outside, Rocco yelped sharply. The second guard had managed to kick him aside and was raising the blade again. Rocco staggered to his feet, but he was a second too slow. The knife arced downward. Lydia ran. Elias didn't see her at first. He was locked in a struggle on the ground, wrestling Graham's wrist to keep the knife from his throat. He shoved hard, rolling Graham over, but Graham fought with feral desperation. "You should have stayed out of this." Graham snarled. "You should have been a man." Elias shot back. Behind them, Rocco lunged again toward the knife aimed at him. Lydia reached them first. She threw herself between Rocco and the descending blade. The steel grazed her shoulder, cutting through fabric and skin. She gasped but didn't stop. She grabbed the attacker's wrist with both hands and twisted as hard as her shaking arms allowed. The man cried out. The knife fell into the snow. Rocco took the opportunity. He lunged and latched onto the man's coat, dragging him backward with ferocious strength. Lydia collapsed to her knees, clutching her shoulder. Elias finally overpowered Graham, flipping him face down in the snow and pinning him by the arm. Graham thrashed, but he was no match for the raw strength of a former ranger fueled by fury. "You could walk?" Graham spat, breath fogging the air. "All this time, you could walk." Lydia lifted her head, her face pale but resolute. "Yes, and I still didn't choose you." For the first time, Graham's expression cracked. Shock, hurt, rage twisted together in something almost childlike. Rocco released the second guard and trotted to Lydia's side, whining anxiously, pressing his head under her hand as if urging her to stay awake. Lydia stroked his fur with her uninjured hand, breathing through the pain. Sirens echoed faintly through the valley, growing louder, slicing through the wind. Elias didn't move from where he held Graham down. He didn't need to. The fight was gone from the man beneath him. Soon, the Forest Service Patrol SUVs emerged through the swirling white. Officers leaped out, weapons drawn, assessing the scene with quick, efficient movements. Elias lifted his hands slowly. 2 suspects here, 1 more under the snowbank. Dog wounds them both. Dog deserves a medal. The senior ranger nodded, already moving to restrain Graham and the guards. Lydia sat in the snow, bleeding but conscious. Rocco refused to leave her side, leaning his weight against her, as if anchoring her to the world. Elias walked over and knelt beside her. "You didn't have to do that." She looked at him, eyes shining. "Yes, I did. He was going to kill Rocco." The wind howled again, softer this time, like a storm losing its rage. Graham, now handcuffed, glared at her. "You could walk, Lydia, from the start. You could walk, and you still didn't pick me." Lydia met his stare without shrinking. "You were never someone I could choose." Rocco growled low, a final warning even now that the threat was gone. Elias placed a steady hand on the shepherd's back. "It's over, buddy. You did good." Rocco's tail thumped once against the snow, a quiet acknowledgement. The officers began escorting Graham and the guards towards their vehicles. The storm eased into a soft flurry, the violence slipping quietly into the night. Elias helped Lydia to her feet. She winced but forced a small, grateful smile. She had chosen to stand, to fight, to protect. And Rocco, panting heavily, stood pressed against both of them, as if refusing to let either drift too far. For the first time since the blizzard began, Elias felt something unfamiliar warming the frozen edges of his life. Hope. The storm had passed, leaving the Sawtooth Range washed in a pale, crystalline light. For the first time in days, the sky broke wide open into a cold, unmarred blue. A calm after violence. A kind of silence that felt earned. Graham Whitford was in custody before sunrise. The Forest Service officers worked through the night, gathering statements, securing evidence, and hauling the 2 injured guards to the county medical unit under armed watch. By morning, Graham faced a list of charges long enough to bury what remained of his life. attempted murder, financial coercion, falsifying legal documents, and reckless endangerment. The sheriff's department hinted at federal involvement. The inheritance trust alone involved interstate assets. Justice, in its slow and methodical way, had begun moving. Elias should have felt relieved. But standing outside the cabin in the clear morning light, he felt only exhaustion. A deep ache in muscles long past their prime. A heaviness in his chest that wasn't entirely physical. Rocco padded down the porch steps and sat beside him, leaning his broad shepherd frame against Elias's leg. The dog tilted his head, studying him, as if he could sense the quiet conflict that still churned underneath the victory. "Good work last night," Elias murmured, rubbing behind Rocco's ear. "You kept us alive." Rocco lifted his chin proudly, but his gaze kept flicking toward the tree line, toward the direction where the officers had taken Lydia to give her statement. He had stayed glued to her the entire time, only stepping away when she insisted he rest. He hadn't rested. Not really. Elias understood. He hadn't either. By noon, the valley warmed enough that snow fell from the pines in heavy clumps, thudding softly onto the ground. The air smelled cleaner. The cabin felt too quiet. Elias brewed coffee he didn't drink, sat in the chair he rarely used, listened to the old clock on the mantel tick. Rocco paced circles, restless but patient, occasionally glancing at the door. "She's not coming back, buddy," Elias said softly. Rocco stopped pacing and gave him a look so direct, so stubbornly sure, Elias almost laughed. "You think you know something I don't?" Rocco sat, tail sweeping once across the wooden floor. Elias shook his head, letting out a breath that fogged faintly in the cool air. He turned toward the window and froze. A figure moved along the path between the trees, emerging into the sunlit clearing like a quiet apparition. Lydia. No wheelchair, no limp now that the adrenaline had faded. She walked with careful, measured steps, her arm wrapped in fresh bandages, her hair brushed back but loose, catching the light like threads of gold. Elias opened the door before she reached the porch. The cold blew in, but he barely felt it. "You should be resting," he said. Her smile was gentle, almost fragile. "I did. Then I realized rest isn't what I needed." Rocco trotted out first, circling her once before pressing his head to her thigh, nuzzling her like a soldier greeting a long-lost friend. Lydia crouched carefully, wincing but smiling through it as she buried her fingers in his fur. "I came to thank you both," she said, looking from Rocco to Elias. "You didn't just save me from Graham. You saved me from the version of myself he wanted me to be." Elias swallowed, unsure how to absorb her words. He wasn't used to praise, not after the mistakes he carried from his deployment, not after losing his wife, Emily, to a crash not unlike Lydia's. Survivors didn't feel deserving of gratitude. Lydia rose slowly. The winter sun hit her eyes, revealing something raw but steady. "I kept telling myself I couldn't leave Graham, that I wasn't strong enough, that I needed the chair, the excuses, the fear. And then you two came out of nowhere and tore that lie apart." Elias looked away toward the pines, the memory of Emily flickering through him like a ghost warmed by fire. "I didn't do much," he said. "You did most of the fighting." Lydia stepped closer, searching his face as if she could see the fracture lines he kept buried, the storm inside him, the grief, the guilt. "You did more than you think," she whispered. "You believed me, when I didn't believe in myself." Rocco sat between them, sensing something delicate forming in the silence. He settled, tail brushing the porch, breathing slow and content. Lydia let out a long breath. "I thought once Graham was gone, I'd just go back to the city, back to the noise and meetings and lawyers. But I stood there this morning and realized something. I don't want to go back to the life that let him thrive. I want something quieter, something real. Her gaze drifted toward the mountains, their jagged edges softened by sunlight. I don't know where I'm going yet, but I knew I had to come here first. Elias stared at her for a moment, caught between caution and an inexplicable pull that felt like thawing ice. "Why?" he asked quietly. Lydia's voice softened. "Because you and Rocco, you saved me from the worst version of myself, and maybe from the man I might have become if I kept living in fear." The wind moved gently through the clearing, brushing snow from the branches in soft cascades. Rocco nudged her hand again, insisting on one more touch. She smiled, running her fingers across the shepherd's head. "He saved both of us last night." "Yeah," Elias said, his voice low. "He has a habit of doing that." The three of them stood together on the porch, the sunlight stretching long and warm across the valley, washing away the last traces of the storm. For the first time in a long time, Elias felt the tightness in his chest loosen. The past didn't feel like a shackle. The future didn't feel like a threat. With Lydia here, with Rocco lying content between them, there was something he hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Healing. Slow and unsteady, but real. Justice had been served, but something more important had begun to take root, a chance to live again. Spring came slowly to the Sawtooth Range, like a shy guest stepping across a long frozen threshold. First the ice melted off the river stones, then the pines began shaking loose their winter heaviness, and finally the valley floor broke open with color. Soft green shoots pushed through the soil. The air smelled alive again. Elias noticed it first one morning while patching the cabin roof. The sun had real warmth to it, the kind that settled into the wood, into his bones, into the quiet places inside him that had stayed cold for years. He hammered a new beam into place, paused and listened to the forest, breathing differently. Below him, Rocco lay sprawled on the porch, as if he had personally declared winter over. His tail flicked lazily from time to time, responding to sounds only he could interpret. Then there was Lydia. She had begun visiting the cabin once the legal storm died down. At first, Elias assumed it was temporary, a way to avoid reporters swarming the city courthouse. But as the days passed, her visits stretched longer. She stayed for dinner. She stayed for coffee the next morning. Eventually, she stayed simply because it felt safe here. That afternoon, she walked up the path carrying a paper bag and wearing jeans, a loose sweater, and a look of ease that seemed new even to her. The spring light fell gently across her hair. Elias climbed down from the roof, brushing sawdust off his hands. "Rough day with the press?" She let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. They want to know how a woman who was supposed to be paralyzed walked out of a police station on her own 2 feet. Imagine that. He gave a nod of sympathy. "Must be strange telling the truth after pretending so long." "It is," she said. "But it feels good. Terrifying, but good." Rocco trotted over to her and immediately nudged the bag in her hands. She laughed and gave him a mock stern look. "You know, most dogs have a sense of boundaries," she said. Elias crossed his arms. "Rocco's never had that." Rocco barked once, as if proudly confirming it. Lydia stepped closer and held up the bag. "I brought groceries, and coffee beans you might actually like. Yours taste like they were roasted in the Stone Age." He raised a brow. Stone Age was a good time for coffee. She rolled her eyes but smiled, brushing past him to head inside. Rocco followed like a shadow. Elias paused a beat before joining them, watching how naturally she moved through the doorway now. No chair, no hesitation. Her steps were strong, steady. Freedom had changed her posture. Inside, she unpacked vegetables and bread while Rocco sat beside her, observing every motion as if taking notes. Elias leaned against the counter, simply watching for a moment before speaking. "You're walking better every week." She looked down at her legs, lifting one foot lightly. "I guess fear can weigh more than actual injury." Once I dropped it, everything got lighter. He nodded slowly. He knew about invisible weights, how they clung, how letting go felt like betrayal, even when it saved you. Lydia tied her hair back and began chopping carrots. Elias stepped up beside her to help, and for a moment their shoulders brushed. Just a touch, barely noticeable, but something in him tightened, then loosened in a way that felt unsettling. Rocco noticed too. The dog lifted his head, studied both of them, then rested his chin on Lydia's boot as if claiming her. She looked down and laughed softly. "He's getting attached." Elias cleared his throat. "He's not like that with most people." She looked up at him, and there was a softness in her eyes he hadn't expected. Maybe he knows something you don't. He turned away before she could see the flush creeping up his neck. They cooked together in a quiet rhythm, the kind that didn't require conversation. Outside, the last of the snow melted in small rivulets down the hillside. Spring wind rattled the windows gently. When dinner was done, they stepped out onto the porch. The sky was a deep gold, spilling over the mountains. Rocco sat at Lydia's feet, his body pressed against her leg in a protective gesture that was becoming more frequent. Lydia smiled down at him, then looked at Elias. "Do you think he's always like this, or is it just with me?" Elias hesitated. Rocco had saved countless lives overseas. He had learned quickly who needed comfort and who needed warning. But this was different. He wasn't just guarding Lydia, he was choosing her. Finally, Elias answered, "He bonds fast, but he doesn't bond deep with just anyone." Lydia considered that quietly. Her voice when she spoke was barely above a whisper. "Maybe he thinks I'm part of your world now." Elias stared at her, the wind shifting the loose strands of her hair. The moment stretched, full of things unsaid. Then Rocco stood abruptly and trotted to the edge of the clearing, ears lifted. Elias stiffened. Bears had begun waking early this season. But after a long moment, Rocco relaxed. "Just a deer," Elias said softly. Lydia let out a breath she'd been holding. Even in peace, she wasn't used to calm. Elias walked to her side again. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. You know that." She met his eyes. "I know. That's why I keep coming back." Rocco brushed past them, deliberately standing between their legs like a living bridge, tail swaying with quiet certainty. Elias exhaled, half amused, half unsettled. He crouched and scratched Rocco's neck. "Are you trying to tell me something, boy?" Rocco looked up at him with a gaze so knowing Elias felt foolish for asking. Lydia laughed softly. "Maybe he's choosing for you." Elias felt the warmth of her presence beside him, the steady beat of spring around them, the sense that time was giving him a second chance he didn't dare expect. He looked toward the mountains, where sunlight lingered like a promise. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Maybe he is." The river thawed completely by mid-May, its waters running clear and fast along the edge of the valley. Birds returned. The cabin no longer felt like a place Elias hid from the world, but a place the world gently sought him in. And most of that change came from Lydia. She arrived one morning with a folder tucked beneath her arm and a nervous spark in her eyes. Elias was repairing a fence post while Rocco trotted between them, carrying a fallen branch as if it were a trophy. Lydia held the folder out. "I want you to look at something." Elias wiped his hands on his jeans and opened it. Inside were mission statements, donation pledges, legal drafts, and a logo sketched in charcoal. Winding path shaped subtly like a guardian angel's silhouette, with a German shepherd's head above it. Angel's Path Foundation, he read aloud. Lydia nodded, clasping her hands to keep them from trembling. A program for veterans and rescue dogs, PTSD support, training programs, scholarships, emergency relocation funding, everything I wish someone had offered you, everything I wish someone had offered me. Elias stared at the pages long enough that she looked slightly embarrassed. If you think it's stupid, I can... But he shook his head slowly. No, it's good. More than good. Rocco bumped Lydia's leg, then Elias's, as if appointing himself the third decision-maker. Lydia dropped to her knees beside the dog. I want you both to help me lead it. I mean that. I want this to be ours. Elias felt something shift inside him. Not dramatic, not a lightning strike. More like a knot loosening in the center of his chest, one he had carried since Afghanistan. Ours, he repeated quietly. Rocco barked once, sharp and approving, as if casting a vote. Lydia laughed, relief softening her shoulders. That's a yes from him. A week later, they sat inside a small office space she had rented in Boise, signing final paperwork. Lydia wore a simple navy dress. Elias wore a clean shirt he hadn't taken out of the drawer in years. Rocco wore nothing except the air of a dog who understood he was part of something important. Reporters came within days. They arrived in SUVs and rental vans, carrying cameras and notebooks, drawn by the story that had traveled fast across the state. A bride left for dead in a snowstorm, saved by a reclusive veteran and a combat-trained shepherd. There were headlines calling her the Angel of Sawtooth, or the Miracle Bride, or the Survivor Saint. None of those names sat right with her. Outside the new foundation office, the press gathered beneath the spring sun. Microphones rose like a metal forest. Lydia stepped forward, poised but still carrying the quiet scars of everything she'd been through. She began with the expected statements. Gratitude, mission, purpose. But then she paused, her gaze moving to Elias, standing slightly behind her with Rocco at his side. They're calling me a miracle, she said. Some are calling me an angel, but none of that is true. I survived because someone refused to walk away from what he saw, and because his dog understood something even he didn't. The murmurs stirred through the crowd. Lydia's voice warmed. If anyone here needs a name like that, it's them. Cameras pivoted toward Elias. He shifted, uncomfortable in the spotlight. His jaw tightened. He wasn't good at being seen. Rocco stood steady beside him, head up, the sun catching the faint streaks of grey around his muzzle. Lydia continued. The real angel is the man who reached into a frozen wreck and pulled me back into the world, and the dog who never once doubted I was worth saving. Rocco let out a soft sound, half chuff, half sigh. Lydia smiled and reached down to stroke his head. The photographers captured it instantly. Elias felt the attention pressing in, but he held his ground. Not for the reporters, for her. After the conference, the three of them stepped away from the crowd toward a quiet stretch of sidewalk. Lydia touched Rocco's collar, tracing the worn spots from years of service. He's our living mascot now, she said, the face of the foundation. Rocco sat proudly at her feet, almost posing. Elias smirked. He'll expect a paycheck. Lydia laughed. He deserves one. But the moment softened. Her smile faded into something deeper, earnest. Elias, this foundation isn't just for other people. It's for us too. A path out of everything that tried to bury us. A path forward. He didn't answer at first. He looked at Rocco, at the woman beside him, at the spring sunlight spilling across the pavement, warming all the cold places. When he finally spoke, it was low. I never thought anything good would grow out of that storm." Lydia stepped closer, her voice no louder than the breeze. "Sometimes the storm is what clears the ground." Rocco nudged Elias's hand until he placed it on the dog's head. A quiet moment passed between the three of them, tight as a knot and warm as a promise. Legacy, Elias realized, wasn't always built on triumph. Sometimes it grew from survival, from grace, from the people and creatures who refused to let you disappear. He looked at Lydia, at Rocco. "Maybe this is the start of something," he said. Lydia's eyes glistened with something hopeful. "I think it already is." Above them, the spring sky stretched clear and bright. Rocco sat between them, chest out, tail steady, as if guarding not just lives anymore, but a future they hadn't dared to imagine. A new path, a shared legacy, and a dog who had chosen it long before they did. The opening day of Angel's Path Foundation felt nothing like the storms that had brought them here. The sun leaned warm across the foothills, catching the new sign mounted above the entrance, a shepherd silhouette rising along a winding trail. People from every corner of Idaho filled the lawn, veterans in worn jackets, families with dogs tugging at their leashes, reporters carrying bright microphones. The air buzzed with something alive. But for Elias Hart, the world had narrowed down to two steady presences beside him. Lydia, who stood barefoot in the new grass to remind herself she was free, and Rocco, who lay at his feet like a sentry finally at rest. Photographers moved in waves through the crowd as the ceremony wrapped. The board members spoke. Local leaders offered praise. A veteran in a wheelchair thanked them through tears, but the noise fell away when a young reporter with a blue notebook approached Elias. She lifted her microphone. "Mr. Hart, one question for the opening feature. With everything you've been through, everything this foundation represents, why did you keep Rocco with you through it all?" Crowd quieted just enough for the question to hang in the air. Elias looked down at Rocco. The shepherd lifted his head slowly, amber eyes fixed on him, the same eyes that had pulled him through war, grief, and winter storms. Rocco nudged his hand once, grounding him. Then Elias looked at Lydia. Her smile wasn't wide. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of smile that came only after surviving something that almost erased you. Her eyes glowed like the first warm summer after years of cold. A reminder that storms didn't just destroy, sometimes they carved a new beginning. Elias turned back to the reporter. "He didn't save my life," he said, voice low but steady. "He saved the man I thought I'd lost." A murmur moved through the crowd. Cameras clicked. Lydia's breath hitched softly, but she didn't look away. Rocco rose to his feet and pressed his nose against Elias's palm, sealing the truth he'd just spoken. For a moment, it felt like the entire valley paused. Elias faced the camera directly. His voice settled into something deeper, meant for anyone who'd ever lost themselves in the dark. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" A breeze lifted across the lawn, sweeping past the new building's wooden beams, through the wildflowers, and across Rocco's fur. It was gentle, certain, almost like a nod from a creature who had found the place he was meant to guard. The ceremony transitioned into laughter, clinking cups, and families touring the sanctuary. But Elias stepped back, giving the moment room to breathe. Lydia came to his side, brushing her shoulder against his. Rocco sat between them, tail lightly brushing the earth. "He's proud of you," Lydia whispered. Elias shook his head. "I think he's proud of us." Rocco gave a small chuff, as if confirming the verdict. Lydia laughed softly and leaned down to kiss the top of his head. As the sun dipped toward the ridge, the sanctuary lights warmed the clearing. People gathered around the training yard where veterans practiced commands with new rescue dogs. A woman snapped a photo of an older shepherd learning to heel again. A boy hugged a shy, mixed-breed pup who had never let anyone touch him until today. Lives were being rebuilt in small, quiet ways. Elias watched it all, and for the first time since returning from combat, he didn't feel like a broken man standing at the edge of life. He felt present, whole, seen. And the dog who had carried him through every shadow now walked forward with him into something light. Lydia slipped her hand into his, tentative, but certain. He didn't pull away. Rocco trotted ahead, stopping to look back at them with a look that needed no translation. A look that said the storm was behind them, that the road ahead, whatever it held, belonged to all three of them now. The breeze rolled once more through the grass, carrying the faint scent of pine and sun-warmed earth. A new beginning. A legacy built not on survival alone, but on choosing to step forward, together. As the foundation lights flickered on and guests began to leave, the camera crew filmed their final shots. The reporter rehearsed her closing line. But the real closing line belonged to Elias, and to Rocco, a veteran, a survivor, a shepherd who refused to quit. And a question that lingered long after the video ended. What's your story with a loyal pet? If you've ever been saved, changed, or guided by a dog, share your story. Support German Shepherd Rescue. And don't forget to follow and subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. Rocco, catching the last golden light on his coat, lifted his head as if blessing the moment. Some stories end quietly. Theirs ended with a beginning.